All right, video 3 for Unit 4 is going to be talking about the two most important city-states in ancient Greece. We're going to be talking about Sparta, which was the dominant military culture of ancient Greece. And then the second one is going to be Athens, which has incredible accomplishments in science and technology and culture, stuff that still influence us today. And so those are the two city-states, and we'll talk about those. And hopefully you enjoy the video.
Unit 4, Part 3. We're going to talk about the Greek city-states of Sparta and Athens in this video. And of course, here's your SOL. And we're going to be talking about how citizenship and the development of democracy happen in Athens. We're also going to compare the lifestyles of the two city-states. And then eventually we're going to talk about in the next video how the wars where they fought together and against each other had a tremendous impact on Greek civilization. All right, we're going to start with Sparta. And Sparta was a descendants of the Dorians. They're the group that founded Sparta. And if you remember from earlier, the Dorians are the group that came in and conquered the Mycenaeans with iron weapons. They also did not have reading and writing. So the Spartan civilization is going to be located on Peloponnesia, which is down here. It looks like the claw, and you can see the city-state of Sparta. Now remember that Sparta was actually made up of 5 separate villages, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the governments. Okay, that is the peninsula that is in the southern part of Greece. And the economy of Sparta was based on agriculture, but none of the Spartan citizens actually participated in agriculture. Okay, so most Greek city-states, as we talked about because of their geography, had a lot of colonies. Sparta, however, did not. Number one, they did have more land, arable land, to grow crops on than probably any other place. But what they decided to do instead of set up colonies was to enslave some of the local neighboring city-states. And these slaves were called helots, and they did the actual work on the farms. Now there was also another group of citizens, well they weren't citizens, that had, they were called freemen, and they were artisans and merchants from the conquered territories. Now they weren't slaves, but they didn't have the rights of a Spartan citizen. Together, the freemen and the helots outnumbered the Spartans 200,000 to 10,000. Now, as you can imagine, one of the things they're probably going to try to do is that's 20 to 1, and a revolution might be in hand. And of course, in 650 BC, the freemen and the helots did revolt. It took 30 years for the Spartans to suppress it, and they decided that from then on, the best way for them to keep control was to establish a dominant military society. And that's what Sparta did. There was a saying about Sparta's military that it was so good that it didn't need walls. Okay, so what was it like to be a Spartan boy? Newborn babies were tested at birth to see if they were healthy. If they were deemed healthy, they went back with their parents. If they were considered unhealthy, they were left on the hillside to die. The Spartans didn't have time to waste resources on babies that were not going to be good soldiers. At age 7, boys were taken to a barracks to live, and it was a brutal lifestyle. They were taught how to fight and how to survive. They were left in the woods with no clothing, and if they were caught trying to find food and other things, they would be beaten. It was definitely like I said, a very brutal upbringing. You were trained to be incredibly disciplined, and at age 20, Oh, there's the little boy being taken to the barracks to live. At age 20, you would be sent to the frontier or to whatever your unit was that you had to fight. And then, at age 30, you were allowed to get married, but you were expected to live in the barracks, and you did so until you were age 60. How about Spartan women? Well, Spartan women had more rights than any other women in Greece. They'd had no voting rights, so don't get me wrong on that, and no direct role in government. But Spartan women were supposed to be outspoken, speak their mind. They were healthy and strong. And if you believe the movie The 300, they were certainly very attractive. Okay, now some of the things that the Spartans did that were pretty cool is that they fed female infants as much as the boys, and girls were taught sports as well. Now, the reason they were fed as much is the same reason that girls were not allowed to get married until they were 19. Now, in the rest of the Greek city-states, the average age for a girl to get married was 14. But the Spartans knew they wanted to have healthy babies, strong babies, and they needed healthy women to do that. So they fed female infants the same amount, and they also taught them how to be athletic and to defend themselves. They wanted healthy babies. And of course, when you got Gorgo here, exactly. Okay, so what about the Spartan government? The Spartan government had two kings. One was to lead the army, and the other one was to lead their religion. Now, they had no other powers outside of that. The real power technically was with the assembly, which included all the males over the age of 20. They're the ones who passed the laws and made decisions about war or peace. But the group that actually ran the day-to-day operation of the cities were the ephors. They were 5 overseers who were elected to run things, and one was elected from each of the 5 villages that made Sparta. Now, together, this little type of government is called an oligarchy. An oligarchy is rule by a small group, and in this case, it was 5 retired military officers who ruled over Sparta. There was also a council of elders, which was made up of 28 men over the age of 60. This group acted as a supreme court. Okay, so check this out. This is sort of a breakdown of the Spartan government. And if you notice that the ephors are at the top, one was elected from each of the 5 villages. If you were actually a Spartan citizen up here at the top of the pyramid, then you were further broken into 3 categories. And then you had the Parochi, which were the freemen, and at the bottom you had the Helots, who had been conquered. And as you can see, they had no voting power whatsoever. Over here are the 2 kings, just as we described. Okay, so what are the basic things that we get out of this? Sparta was not great at trade and manufacturing. There was very little intellectual advancements or accomplishments that came from Sparta. But they were always really good in the Olympics, and whenever Greece needed to be defended, who are you going to call? You're going to call Sparta. Okay, so that brings us to the other Greek city-state. That's Athens, and they were descendants of the group the Mycenaeans, who had been conquered by the Dorians. It was located on a peninsula northeast of Peninsula that is called Attica. Easy for me to say. So Athens was located right here. The amazing thing about Athens is it will become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. 25 to 30 of the most brilliant minds will exist at almost the same time in the same city, and that is amazing. The odds of it happening are crazy. And so we're going to talk about how their governments evolve and the fact that it did have a great deal of freedom if you were a man to have a lot of success and to be a free thinker. Okay, so what were the governments of Athens like? Well, at first, like most Greek city-states, they picked a strong person to be their king. So it had a monarchy first. But then what happened was the military needed more and more items, and so they relied upon the rich to provide them with resources. And so the aristocrats, or the wealthy, ruled by the wealthy is what it used to mean. Now it means, it used to mean ruled by the best, but now it means ruled by the wealthy, took over power. And of course soon the common man who did most of the fighting and didn't have as much wealth wanted more rights. And so for a period they are going to have anarchy. And then they will invite in tyrants. Tyrants are going to be rulers who have total power. And we'll talk more about the tyrants in detail in just a minute. But the tyrants will have absolute power. And then finally, Athens will settle on a direct democracy where all the citizens vote. Now, I don't want you to get the idea that every person could vote. First off, it was just men and even property owners at the beginning. But by 507 BC, all free men could vote. So now if you would pause the video and pick out in the box, describe the government which you think is the best and defend your choice. Alright, so let's talk about some of the tyrants who were invited in. The hostility between the working class people and the aristocrats leads to a period of anarchy and violence. And so the people of Athens actually welcome in a tyrant who has total power. The first of these is Draco. And his name will become synonymous with harsh and cruel. And the reason is that his law code is that harsh. You got death for stealing a cabbage. So if you stole this, you got this. Or maybe they got you like this. Yeah. So now you know how Draco Malfoy got his name, right? Cruel and severe is what draconian means. Now, the next tyrant that we want you to know about is Solon. He created economic reforms and political reforms. He canceled the debt of many of the poorer citizens, and he created a two-house legislature. Pisistratus divided the land to give non-landowners the ability to have their own property, and he created loans and work to employ the poorer citizens. And Cleisthenes is the guy who finally will end many of the local rivalries and establish a direct democracy as the government of Athens. Okay, as a direct democracy, the assembly is what held the power. They sort of acted as the laws by creating laws and acted as a supreme court. They also appointed 10 generals to help run the city-state itself and the military. There was also a council of 500, which was chosen by lottery, and they created the taxes and the treaties and handled public works. Now the cool thing was that there were slots in a wall that every person who was a citizen, so they were a male adult citizen, they pulled out a tab from this drawer in this rock shelf, and if it had the symbol on it, they were a member. Now the reason they chose a lottery was because they felt like the rich and well-spoken could dominate elections. So they wanted to make it fairer and to get the most people involved in their Okay, so I have two things I want you to do in your notes. The first one is there's a chart on Sparta and Athens, and we will discuss some of this in class, but I want you to give the advantages and disadvantages to living in both city-states. So that's right down here. Then I want you to pick which city-state you think it would be the best to live in and tell me why you would feel that way. Okay, so let's talk about life in the city-state of Athens in general. Okay, first off, just like we talked about with the Spartan children, every boy was educated in Athens. He went to school from age 7 till when he graduated at age 18. He was taught the Iliad, the Odyssey, arithmetic, geometry, drawing, music, and gymnastics. He was also taught public speaking, which I can't do all of a sudden. It's called rhetoric. And he was basically taught to live by a code of ethics, rules of good conduct and morals. Remember how I told you that the Greeks were really big into personal responsibility? Now, they were usually taught by a male slave that was called a pedagogue. That's where we get the idea of pedagogy in education, where you have a process by which you teach. Now, this slave would often carry a stick, and if the boy did not perform the duties he was expected to, he would be smacked with the stick. Now, girls received no formal education, although some women will push to get themselves recognized, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But again, only what they were taught at home. Athenian women had so many more restrictions, and we'll talk more about that as well. Okay, so what about the Athenian courts? Juries had between 201 and 1,001 members. Now, notice it was a majority rule vote on the court cases. Your guilt or innocent was determined by the majority. They always had an odd number so that it wouldn't be a tie. And then they had large juries because they figured it was harder to bribe 100 people than it was, say 6 or 7. Also, some of the penalties that you may face were like ostracism, where you would be kicked out of the city for 10 years. And in some cases, the death was the result. We'll talk more about that when we get to Socrates. Okay, so now what I would like for you to do is answer which jury system you think was best, the Athenians or ours, and explain your answers. Right here. Alright, so what are the big ideas of this video? First, that Sparta established a military-based oligarchy. Life in Sparta revolved around the military, and the 5 ephors are who ran the city. So that is an oligarchy, a rule by a small group. Slaves did much of the work, and the economy was based on agriculture and the work of those slaves. In Athens, they transitioned through many styles of government, eventually having a direct democracy, which of course would have a heavy influence on Western culture.